The latest edition of the CSI Handbook indicates that corporates in South Africa spent an estimated 6.9 billion rands on corporate social investment initiatives in the 2011-2012 period. This is an 11% increase on CSI investments on the previous year. The corporate and the non-profit organization sectors consider the CSI Handbook as an authoritative guide to corporate social investment in South Africa. For more on this, we're talking now to Cathy Duff, one of the directors of the company Trialogue, responsible for researching and publishing the handbook. Cathy, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Tabo.
When we speak of corporate social investment, or CSI as they put it, what are we talking about?
We use a very broad definition of CSI in our estimates. So we include all giving to social causes by companies in South Africa. And this giving can be financial, so it includes the giving of money to non-profit organizations, community-based organizations. It also includes the donation of goods and services from companies. So this might be food or clothing from a retailer or any other goods and services. And we also include the value of employees' time. So where employees volunteer, that's also included in our definition.
So when we speak of 6.9 billion rands, it's including of all those services,
yes,
and including time. How do you measure that, though? How do you measure the time that corporates are giving to charitable work?
That's an interesting point. And you mentioned earlier that there's been an 11% increase. A large portion of the increase, we think, is attributable to better measurement. So 10 years ago, companies weren't monetizing or measuring the value of their employees' time, but increasingly they are doing that. And what that involves is measuring how many hours are actually contributed to social causes, and then converting these into a rand amount by putting a cost to company of the employee onto that.
And which sort of companies are involved in CSI initiatives?
There's a variety of companies. I mean, in CSI initiatives, generally, most companies are involved in some way, and most companies have some kind of CSI initiatives. In rural areas in particular, we find that those companies that have some kind of businesses or interest in those areas are more involved. So the mining sector, for example, they fund CSR projects both around their operations and their mines, but also in what are called the labor sending areas. So they need to fund projects where their labor comes from, and this is actually driven by the mining charter. And a lot of mining labor comes from the Eastern Cape, for example. So you see a lot of rural projects managed by the mining companies. The other sectors where there's rural involvement would be those related to agriculture. So a lot of the sugar industry is involved in rural CSI projects, as well as the forestry industry, and also the tourism industry. So if you look at tourism and some of the lodges, some of their CSI programs are focused in the rural communities around where they operate.
Are there particular projects that they're funding at the moment?
So on the whole, urban and rural, most corporates fund education projects. So over 90% of corporates do fund education projects. And we estimate that over 40% of all the CSI funding goes to those types of projects. So we do find that that you'll find those kind of projects in rural and in urban areas. Where we think there might be a slight difference is that in rural areas you will find more agricultural type projects. And we also find slightly more infrastructure build in rural areas. Often in deep rural, there's a lack of infrastructure, and people see in the media children learning under trees and stuff like that. And so there is projects that focus on basic infrastructure, and we find these can make a real difference to rural communities.
Do you find that sort of investment, what one would say, making these projects a little bit more sustainable, a little bit more successful?
Yes. We feel that most of the corporates we deal with really are committed to trying to make a valuable difference to the communities in which they operate. And in rural areas, companies face particular challenges that may make it more difficult for these projects to be sustainable or successful. So part of that is logistical, just in terms of infrastructure, electricity, water, connectivity. Part of it's also finding good implementing partners and non-profits or other implementing partners that can assist with projects in rural communities. So there are particular difficulties that rural communities face, but I think there's also examples of great successes where companies have made a simple donation that has made a valuable and tangible difference to those communities.
And those that have been successful, what would you attribute their success to?
I think there's a number of success factors. Firstly, I would say having some kind of proximity to that community. So as I mentioned, either a geographic proximity in terms of operations, or having a trusted implementing partner that's there to understand the needs of that community and respond to that community in particular. I think another success factor, particularly in the rural areas, is to keep it simple. So sometimes we see where projects haven't worked, companies have gone in with solutions that have ended up being too sophisticated. You know, even in agriculture, you might have a company coming in and starting a hydroponics project, and that technology and methodology is unknown, and the project might not work. So I think the simpler it is, and the more it responds to the community's needs, and the closer in proximity the company is to that community, the more successful the project is.
It's Cathy Duff joining us in the studio today, part of the directors of the company Trialogue, responsible for the CSI handbook, sharing some very important information with us. Thanks so much, Cathy, for dropping by.
Thank you.